Hi everyone, welcome to my kitchen. My name is Nicole Klein, and today I'll be doing a recipe demonstration in celebration of Native American Heritage Month. Um, so, one of the things that I think celebrates culture best is language and food. So I decided, when thinking about a program to do to celebrate and commemorate Native American heritage, I decided to look for some indigenous ingredients, and particularly an indigenous chef. And I found one through the New York Times. His name is Sean Sherman. He is an Oglala Lakota Sioux chef, and he is a published cookbook author. And he has several recipes calling for tepary beans, which I was able to purchase from Ramona Farms through a small farm in Arizona. So really cool to support an indigenous woman-owned business, and going authentic here with our ingredients. This is something I really enjoy doing with my cooking, so it was fun to find this. Now I'm just going to read the back of this info here on the tepary bean because it's really interesting. This is the brown variety, and these beans are a workhorse when it comes to fiber and protein, calcium, iron, lots of nutrients. I'll get to this more in a minute. I realized first I better get these onions cooking. So I've got a saucepan here. I'm going to heat some oil over medium heat, about 2 tablespoons, though I am eyeballing it. I'm going to let that heat, and we'll be adding 1 small chopped onion. Whoops. A tablespoon or so of a chili powder. It's a mild chili powder. Sherman suggests using New Mexico or Hatch because you will be using a lot. And then I've got this wonderfully fragrant chopped fresh sage here. It just smells incredible. So that's heating up. And I should mention, while we're heating this oil, this recipe that I'm doing today is really my adaptation of Sherman's recipe because I really couldn't find all the ingredients. I was able to get the tepary beans, but I couldn't find dried hominy. So we'll be using canned hominy instead, and I've rinsed it off, and we'll kind of eyeball that when we add it to the dish. Okay, I'm gonna add this onion, our tablespoon of chili powder, and then in goes the chopped sage. And we're gonna let this sweat out for about 5 to 8 minutes. Let's see. Already smells amazing, and the oil has got this beautiful orange, rusty orange hue from the powder, chili powder. Okay, so more about these beans. Tepary beans, they have a traditional, I'm not sure what language it is, name. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it out of respect. But they are the ancient superfood of the Sonoran Desert. And let's see, they are supposed to have a subtle earthy flavor with an almost nut-like taste and aroma when cooking that is reminiscent of the smell of the summer rain on the desert. I like that. Anyway, these are heirloom beans. They are drought resistant, and they're actually the most drought adapted species of bean in the world, and high in soluble and insoluble fiber, protein, and a low glycemic index food. So 70% of daily value of calcium, iron, it looks great, 150% in 1 serving. Now, I will say 1 serving of this is listed as half a cup, which is a quarter of a package, and I don't imagine many of us are going to eat a half a pound of, a quarter pound of dried beans when they're cooked. Anyway, so we're going to keep this going. So I've made this dish before, And I use acorn squash. I'm gonna grab one right quick. This is what an acorn squash looks like. It's the cutest little thing. And I actually hadn't cooked with one before. For the recipe, all you do is chop it in half, and you're going to scoop out the seeds like you would a pumpkin or any other squash. This one's interesting because you don't peel it, so you just leave the skin on. And the first time I made it, I don't think that I quite roasted it enough, and the skin was quite sugary and sort of stuck to your teeth. But this time I think I've got it right, and you'll see. I may have even burnt these a bit too much, but the skin now, when I tried it, was crispy instead of sticking to your teeth. So that's, just something interesting about working with the squash. Now, I've mentioned squash, hominy, and beans. These are called the three sisters, which in Native American folklore and in cooking, that's sort of the trinity, the same that we might say for, let's say, in New Orleans style cooking, you use the onion, bell pepper, and garlic, I think. You probably got that wrong. In French cooking, it's celery, and Italian cooking, celery, onion, and carrot. But anyway, so you'll see the three sisters a lot. The amazing thing about both beans, squash, and corn too is how shelf stable they are. So the one that I cooked today, the acorn squash, I think I bought that maybe even 6 weeks ago, and it looks great. So just something to think about. Succotash is another popular Native American dish that we hear a lot of. I think it's commonly made with lima beans, which honestly, if I eat lima beans, just like flashback to my childhood, I don't think you could pay me to eat lima beans. My mom made them so often. All right. So these have been cooking for about 5 minutes. I mentioned that I did not use dried hominy. The recipe calls for using some of the reserved liquid from the hominy and the beans. So I'm going to have to go with entirely beans with reserved liquid here, but we're going to go ahead and pour that in. It's going to make a lot of noise. There we go. Kind of let that thicken up. And to that, we are going to add the hominy that I have rinsed, taken from the can and rinsed, the squash, the beans, and one final ingredient, kale. And this is actually an Italian style kale, which I know is not true to the recipe, obviously, but look at this, it's just beautiful. It looked too good to pass up. Kale is, it's got this really strong stalk here, which if you cook it low and slow for hours, like in the slow cooker, it makes it edible. But for a recipe like this, where you're hardly cooking it at all, you aren't going to want to eat this. So you're just going to strip the kale from the stalk, and you can do that, by grabbing it like this, or just taking your hand and going like that. And instead of bothering with chopping it, I just ripped it with my hands, and I got all this beautiful kale here. Okay, I'm going to give this a stir. Let's go ahead and add in our squash. I roasted the squash at 425 degrees for about 40 minutes. About halfway through, I opened up the oven and just gave it a flip. Turned it around. Okay. Now we're going to add in the beans. Sean Sherman's recipe calls for using a half a cup of dried beans, which I mentioned was a quarter of the package. Now, these took several hours to cook, so I went ahead and cooked the entire package, and I'm just going to freeze the rest of them. So I'm going to kind of eyeball this here. I really don't know what a half a cup prepared beans looks like. You could use, if you wanted to make this at home without spending the extra money on the traditional teberry beans, you could use black beans, kidney beans, for sure. One thing I did read, though, from Sean Sherman himself, was to use dried beans. They have a better texture than the canned beans, although canned beans, I'm sure, would still be delicious. It's just a texture thing. And, convenience, too. Dried beans take forever. I think I started cooking these beans maybe 5 or 6 hours ago. No, we did a 2-hour sort of like quick soak. And then they've been cooking for 5. So I started these beans 7 hours ago. We're gonna add in our kale, and I'm just gonna add in a whole bunch. The recipe calls for ½ a cup, but I love kale. I'm just gonna stir that in. The more green I can get. Between the beans and the dark leafy greens, this is going to be a super iron-rich meal. If that's something that you are looking to, put in your diet, here's a solution. And now we've got the beautiful brown of the beans, the orange of the squash. Turn that down a little, the bright green of the kale, and now I'm going to add in the yellow of the hominy. I'm going to eyeball this too. If you wanted, I suppose you could use corn instead of hominy. Hominy is kind of a strong flavor and texture. If you're not used to it, I love it. I love the yummy chewiness of it. And if I remember right, hominy is simply just a corn kernel that has gone through some sort of lye treatment process. That's why it kind of soaks that up and takes on this really chewy texture. I think it's really fun. Okay, so that was it. That's the Three Sisters bowl right here. Now I'm going to turn the heat off because we are done cooking. I'll just plate up like a real professional here. Oops. Now, I think if you added this over brown rice, certainly you could serve it on its own. It would make a great side dish, but if you added this over a bowl of rice, or even in keeping with the Indigenous ingredients theme for Native American History Month or Heritage Month, you could use quinoa, indigenous ingredient to Southern America, I believe. Anyway, and then I will show that off. Isn't it beautiful? I hope that you've enjoyed watching this quick video on how to make the Three Sisters bowl, Sean Sherman's recipe, adapted by me, Nicole Klein, the Community Engagement Librarian for the Cobb County Public Library System. This is just one of the ways to celebrate National Native American Heritage Month, and I hope that you take the time, whether it's reading a book or some poetry, taking some time just to think and commemorate on our Native Americans brothers and sisters. Thank you all. Have a great day.